Okay, today we're going to talk about ornamental and turf pests. UT Extension has a publication called PB 1589, Commercial Insect and Mite Control for Trees, Shrubs, and Flowers. It's all our extension publications are available online, so this is one you need to check out. We also have a turf publication I'll show you later in the presentation. In the fall of the year, we start thinking about what can we do now to make pests less a problem in the spring? Because a lot of pests right now are preparing for the winter. Uh, Insects such as tulip tree scale, magnolia scale. The crawlers have already emerged. They usually come out in August and September. And then they're going to later in the fall mold into second instars, which will spend the winter. Azalea lace bugs, for instance, they lay eggs on the underside of leaves along the leaf midvein, and those won't hatch until spring. You can see these tulip tree scale take a full year to develop. The female scales swell up, then starting around August, they lay their eggs, and then that female, she becomes almost like an army helmet, almost hollow, but underneath her are all her eggs, and she'll die, and then the eggs will hatch out. But until that time, she's producing lots of honeydew, and you can even see ants on top of the scale gathering the sticky, sweet honeydew. And those ants will protect them from predators and parasitoids. So they tend to give some protection to the scale, and they get fed for it. Azalea lace bug control in the landscape in the fall or late summer. You can treat active stages with insecticides like orthene, safari, merit, meridian, or even a pyrethroid insecticide. You don't want to spray during bloom, but most azaleas aren't blooming that much in the fall. There are some that will have a second bloom in the fall. Another thing in the fall pest control option we can use would be for mites. Spruce spider mites, southern red mites are active generally in the spring and the fall of the year. And they'll lay a lot of eggs that then will overwinter. So if you can control them before they can lay eggs, that's all the better. Canna is a plant that gets attacked by a couple different types of leaf rollers, and they will overwinter as pupa in the plant debris. So just getting rid of that will help. Also, four-line plant bugs will lay their overwintering eggs in plant debris, so removing that will help. Let's look at the larger canna leaf roller. I started to see this later in the summer, and you can see what they'll do is cut big pieces of leaf and kind of fold the leaf over, then tie it down with some silk. And beneath that is where they will pupate. And this is a type of caterpillar that the adult it's not a butterfly, it's not a moth, it's a skipper. And it's a kind of, you can see the white little threads through the body of the actual larva. That's the tracheal system, I believe. So you can actually see how it breathes. The lesser canna leaf rollers probably we see more often. This caterpillar will use webbing to keep the whorls from unfurling. And you can see here, then they feed within that whorl, and usually on the top layer of the leaf. And that prevents a lot of the flowering from occurring. It just looks terrible. Here shows the lesser canna leaf roller, the moth, and also you can see the caterpillars feeding on the surface. You can see the black excrement or frass, we call that. Look at that, a tree frog even hanging out there. I don't know if he eats the caterpillars or not, but he found a nice place. But you can see you're going to have to get insecticide down into the whorl or use a systemic type insecticide to be absorbed into the leaf. Some controls for caterpillars, systemic would be orthene, for instance. BT and pyrethroids and conserve would be more contact, and I think aceleprint has systemic action. But BT is your Bacillus thuringiensis, your bacterial toxin. It's safe on beneficial, so it just kills caterpillars. So that's a good one to use if you want to save your good bugs. We can also prune out the plant debris in the fall and winter, anytime before spring. Get rid of it because they're pupating. You can see the naked pupae there, kind of with just a little bit of silk to hold them in place. But by cutting those off at ground level and getting rid of it will help quite a bit. Four-line plant bug. This is a mirrored type plant bug. It has 4 black stripes and 3 yellow stripes. The nymphs have little reddish abdomens. You can see the little black wing buds starting to form, but the adult has the fully developed wings. You also notice it kind of dips down at the tail end. There's a little shape of it, of the wing cover. But they feed on over 250 different types of plants. They really like mints in my yard, but they'll get on my forsythia also, woody ornamentals. So what they do, all these mirrored plant bugs, they have toxic saliva, breaks down the cells kind of collapse, you get this sunken necrotic spots. How do you know this isn't a disease? You often will see this in a plant bed. It will be on 3 or 4 different types of plants not related in any way, where diseases tend to get on certain plants and not others. Well, more specific, these have a broad host range. And so if you see it on a lot of different unrelated plants, it's probably the 4-line plant bug. You can see here feeding on a mint. The little nymph, when it first hatches out from those eggs in the spring, is reddish, and they'll do quite a bit of damage. Then they'll become adults and they'll continue. But once that's over in that time of year, they're pretty much done. And then they'll be in the egg stage the rest of the year, throughout the summer and into the fall and winter, and hatch the following spring. So since those eggs are inserted in the host plants, just cutting everything off at ground level, removing it, destroying it, that will remove a lot of the nymphs that come out in the spring to hatch out. Okay, as we move into winter, there's some things we can do also. That's a time where we're usually not as busy, and we can do some pruning, we can do some different things. But with pest control, we can talk about horticultural oil sprays. These are the sprays that you can apply both dormant or winter application, or also in the spring, summer, or fall when leaves are still on the plant. They're a little safer to use. And so you'll have summer uses and winter uses on the label. These are effective on scale insects that tend to overwinter on plants, aphids, adelgids, the mites like the spruce and mite and the southern red mite, the eggs that overwinter, and the rust mites that are active in a lot of stages during the winter. Let's look at tulip tree scale. The crawlers emerge in late August through September. That's the first instar crawler. Best stage to try to control with insecticides or even oil sprays. The second instar nymphs, then they molt to before in the fall sometime before winter, and that's what's going to overwinter. So we can use horticultural oils as a dormant type application or a late fall application. Once the leaves are off the tree, we can treat then, or we can treat it later in the winter or even early spring before new leaves come out. These nymphs, you can see they change color. They're a black color. Euonymus scale is very common. You can get tremendous populations on these Manhattan euonymus, these evergreen type euonymus. The male scales are white, more rod shaped, where the female are more oyster shell shaped. They're kind of a grayish color to reddish to brown color. The female's the one's going to have the eggs underneath her. Most of the females tend to be better position on the plant. They can be on the twigs or some are on the leaves, but you usually see more males on the leaves because if the leaf drops off, they die and the males aren't as important because the females lay the eggs. Spruce spider mites. You can see the eggs plainly on the needles in the wintertime. And you can see they're kind of reddish orange. If they're clear, they've already hatched or they're not viable. Oil sprays during this dormant time will really do a tremendous job of controlling eggs. And in the spring, you'll have very few mites emerge. So this is oil, horticultural oil is a lot less expensive than most of your miticides that you use when the mites are active. So oil sprays are effective and probably underutilized technique. Southern red mites are also more active in the spring and fall. They also have more reddish eggs. The mites are actually kind of the adult female's reddish color. You can actually see her on the leaf with the naked eye. She stands out. These leaves on this cherry laurel, which is in the genus Prunus, you can see they're pretty chlorotic, and that's probably only May or June. So they hatch out probably in April, and they feed in April, May. By June, leaves are starting to show the damage. The little white things there are the cast skins of the mites as they molt. Now remember, these southern red mites, the eggs are going to be on the underside of these broadleaf plants. So you're going to have to spray the underside of the leaf to get good control with your oil. Spruce rust mite damage you can see here. Rust mites are different than spider mites. They're more teardrop shaped. The legs are at the rounded or the wider end, the head end. You can see over time you can get this bronzing coloration. You can see the rust mites on conifers here in the landscape. During the winter time, they will be out on the needles in lots of different life stages. Look at the long cedar or hair on that little rust mite there. But so they're exposed to oil sprays. In the fall or spring, you can also hit them with other type miticides if you want to, but we like in the oils in the winter, early spring, before the new foliage comes out. You can see the eggs of these in the bottom right are a clear color. They're not red or orange, are they? And these are probably tinier than your spider mites. In the spring, lots of things are happening. Your pests are coming out overwintering. There's a lot of things going on. Early in the spring or even late winter, granulate ambrosia beetles, which overwinter as adults, can become active. Anytime it gets above 70 Fahrenheit, these can start flying around looking for trees to attack. Boxwood leaf miters attacking boxwood fairly early, right after the new growth starts to come out. They lay their eggs. Lace bugs, of course, hatch early, usually before bloom. And there's a bunch of different caterpillars. The spring and fall cankerworms. Eastern tent caterpillar is one of the earliest ones to emerge. And then sawflies, they're not caterpillars that are lepidoptera like caterpillars like bagworms, which could be moths or butterflies or skippers. Sawflies are a type of Hymenoptera. So they're related to bees, wasps, ants, and hornets, but they have a larva that looks like a caterpillar. Let's look at the granulate ambrosia beetle. Again, when it gets 70 temperatures, this could be in February, March, even April, May. These become active, they start flying around, and they're looking for trees that are stressed, trees that have had damage from could be drought, could be flooding, whatever stressed them, it's making them release ethyl alcohol. And the beetles can actually detect that ethyl alcohol and they'll attack those trees. And when they attack the tree, they tunnel into the tree, chew a nice clean gallery or tunnel. As they chew, they kick out sawdust like frass in these little strands. I call them frass tubes. And that's the sign you're under attack. So be looking for this in the winter. First sign of that, you need to spray the bark with insecticide. Once inside there, there's the female granulated ambrosia beetle. She's only 3 millimeters long, so she's very tiny, makes about a millimeter diameter type hole. You can see the white ambrosial fungi. She'll carry some fungi on her exoskeleton and inoculate these tunnels. And it's very humid inside that tree. And this white ambrosial fungi then grows. And then when her eggs are laid, the larvae feed on this white fungi. So how do we look for these? How do we monitor? We will put out these traps and we'll bait these funnel traps or bottle traps. Like you can make them out of pop bottles. We'll bait them with ethyl alcohol. That's grain alcohol. We get these little tubes that have semi-permeable, so they'll last a long time, release the ethyl alcohol over a long period of time. But you can also just get a little jar, put some ethyl alcohol in there, put some cotton, something absorbs it and it will release it. You're just going to have to put the ethyl alcohol in there periodically, several times a week, as it's going to evaporate. But you can see once we start catching these in the late winter or spring, we'll let the county agents know, and we'll send out newsletter articles and things and say, now's the time to protect stressed plants. And we can spray them with a insecticide. In the landscape, we can use bifenthrin or permethrin. Bifenthrin is the same product as Tall Star, but Onyx Pro and Onyx, they have a higher rate that you would use for a bark spray against ambrosia beetles. So that's what rate you want to use, and that's what product you want to use. For methrin, we have a product called Astro. You want to spray the bark. I believe these sprays will at least give you really good control for 17 days. So you're going to have to repeat after about a little over 2 weeks. So at the first sign of attack or preventatively, when the beetles start flying, when you get those 70-degree temperatures, that's the time to spray expensive, stressed plants that you want to protect. Let's look at boxwood leaf miner. You can see that that leaf has been under attack for some time. It's starting to bubble up. The larvae of this type of fly, or a little midge, and this little maggot is in there, and it's sort of flattened because it has to live between the top and bottom layer of that leaf. It's going to be in there for almost a full year. The larva, you can see, is kind of yellowish. It's getting good size here in the spring, early spring, and then by probably around April, late March, April, they'll pupate. And the pupa stage, you can see here, they have a pointy little head, and they will point out the underside of the leaf. Once the little orange gnat, the adult, emerges, you'll have these little clear, empty pupal skins. And that usually occurs in late April. So we have several ways we can control. Sometimes you'll see the adults out swarming on the trees, on the shrubs, and you can actually spray a contact insecticide then in April to kill the adults so they don't lay so many eggs. But in general, we're going to probably need a systemic insecticide that's in that foliage, in that leaf. Now, how do we get it there? We can use a soil drench with imidacloprid, for instance. We can apply early. It's taken up by the roots. It's going to be there when the new foliage comes out in late April or early May. Safari or Xylem is more water soluble, gets into the plant earlier, so quicker. So if it's closer to when the eggs are going to be laid and hatched, you can apply that as a drench, or even as a even could spray it on the plant. Now, in April or May, if you didn't do these soil drenches, there are systemic products that you can use as these foliar type sprays. And some people might have concern about, this neonicotinoid insecticide getting into pollen or nectar. So you might want to use it after bloom. And if you want to do that, you can wait till the plant blooms, and then spray the foliage with these systemic type products. We also have products like mainspring. GNL stands for Greenhouse Nursery Landscape. That can also be used. Let's look at lace bugs. Lace bugs are another early season pest that we've had good luck using neonicotinoids to control. You can see the lacy wings on the adult. This type damage, this stippling, this feeding damage, it's going to take a long time. It's going to take, they hatch out in April. They're going to be out all spring, all summer. Late in the summer, they can look bleached out like this. If you look at the underside of the leaves, you'll see the actual lace bugs themselves. And you also see little tar spots, little excrement spots, sticky excrement stuck to the underside of the leaf. So we want to prevent this damage, and we want to treat these fairly early in the season. So our one-time management tool is to drench the soil in February, March with merit or imidacloprid, or in April with Safari or Xylon. We can also use early in the spring. We can use we can use a granular application of clothianidin, Arena. These are all neonicotinoid insecticides. If we want to wait till after bloom, we can spray active stages in spring with orthene, Safari, merit, celiprin, pyrethroids. Okay, and this we can do that also. In that way, if you have people concerned about neonicotinoids, just wait till after bloom and spray them. Let's look at some caterpillars like bagworms. Bagworms overwinter inside the bag. The female actually laid her eggs, then she died, and then she's inside the bag. The male, you can see in last August, was a little moth. The pupal case opened, the male emerged, found a female, they mated. She produced her eggs, then she dies and dries up. So she's just like a dead, empty carcass. It's not empty, it's full of eggs, isn't it? And it's inside that waterproof bag. So those eggs are the overwintering stage. So let's say from May through the fall, through the winter, they're in the egg stage, then early, spring, usually in May, they start to emerge. Now, if you control these early in May or early June, by the first week or two of June, you'll see very little damage. The little caterpillars, the first, second instars don't do that much damage. It's not till they get fourth and fifth instar, the larger caterpillars, more mature. And then when they get that stage, they can just devour the foliage in a number of days. You can see here, they're particularly damaging on conifers. You can see these plants that's a over 6 foot tall person there. And look how much damage they've done in one summer. So this damage you really can't outgrow. It kind of ruined the look of those plants. But again, it started probably in May, and it's been going on. This is probably a picture taken in August. You can see all the bagworms up in there. They're already attached to the plant. Want to control those early again. Spring and fall cankerworms can also do defoliation in the spring. The foliage comes out in the spring. You have a full tree full of leaves, and then all of a sudden, within a week or so, you'll notice the leaves look tattered. As the caterpillars get older, you'll see them drop down on silken threads. Cankerworms mean they have a reduced number of prolegs, so they kind of loop like an inchworm or a looper when they crawl. Another caterpillar that you'll see not so early in the spring, but more summer caterpillars, the fall webworm. And these will make webbing out on the ends of the branches. You'll see these in pecans and walnut trees and a lot of different type trees, persimmon, for instance. And you can see that they have two forms, a black-headed form and a red-headed form. And they feed gregariously in a group and within a kind of a silken nest. They'll cover a leaf up. So if you're going to spray them, you need to spray You can spray the nest, but you're going to have to spray the foliage on which they're feeding as much as possible. Sawflies, let's talk about sawflies. They're not Lepidoptera, are they? Now that fall webworm caterpillar we just showed you, it had actually 5 pair of prolegs. Sawflies are going to have 7 or 8 pair. You can see here this pine sawfly has 8 arrows, 8 pair of prolegs, which their fleshy prolegs allow them to hold on to leaves and such. And why I tell you this is BT, Bacillus thuringiensis, like dipel, it's very effective on caterpillars because it doesn't kill the beneficial insects. So use that for fall webworms and things like that. But it will not kill conifer sawflies or any kind of sawfly. So it's you have to be able to, if it has more than 5 pair of prolegs, do not use the BT products. It won't do a thing. You can see the adult, the conifer sawfly, the introduced pine sawfly adult is a little buzzy bee looking thing. It's not a moth, butterfly, or skipper, is it? It's not a lepidoptera. It's a hymenoptera. Here's a hibiscus sawfly. You can see the adult on the bottom left and some larvae on the bottom right. You can see they can make things look pretty ragged fast. Here's on rose mallow. But again, BT won't work. A pyrethroid insecticide would work. Carbaryl would work. Other insecticide will get them. What else are we going to see in the spring? Well, there's lots going on. There's imported fire ants that have spent the winter underground, and they're going to start coming up foraging for food. There's aphids and adelgids that might be in the egg stage, might be in adult stages. We have spruce mites, southern red mites we've talked about, and the rust mites. And of course, lots of scale insects. So let's look at the imported fire ants first. You can see a wing form right there in the middle. That's how they disperse. The wing forms will fly, they mate in the air, then they land on disturbed areas of soil. So a lot of construction sites and places like that, you'll see a lot of fire ants. They're able to get their mounds established in that disturbed soil a lot better. When I first came here in '92, we had fire ants only probably in the southern tier counties. Now they're all the way up into Davidson County. They're up into a lot of counties, most counties in Tennessee, and even in some counties in southwestern Kentucky. So they're really moving north. They need some cold winters to knock them back, and we just haven't had any really lately. But it's really the fluctuation of temperatures. Warm days followed by real cold weather very quickly can catch them up in the soil profile and sometimes kill them that way. But if it stays cold, they tend to go deep. When we control fire ants, we talk about the 2-step method. I don't know if it's a Texas 2-step, could be. Step 1 is to use bait when temperatures are warm and ants are foraging. That means usually 70-degree temperatures or so. And they'll be out foraging. If you want to know the foraging, just throw a potato chip down and see if they come to that. You want to use it when the grass is dry. Okay, you apply the bait, you can broadcast the bait. You don't directly put it on the mound, just broadcast all around. They're going to find it, they're going to forage for it and bring it back to the nest. These toxicants are low toxicity, but they will kill over time, they'll kill the nest. The second step is going to be where you'll treat the mound directly. So let's say 2 weeks later and go out and find the mounds that are near sidewalks, near where a lot of people frequent, and treat those directly with an insecticide. And that's the 2-step method. All our insecticide recommendations and aesthetic thresholds and such are in the commercial turfgrass insect control, PB 1342. So look that up, it's online. We try to update these things every year or two at the most. Let's look at some aphids that are new to Tennessee, or fairly new. The Asian woolly hackberry aphid came from China. Now, how you would think, if it came from China, do they have hackberries over there? Yeah, they actually have trees in the genus Celtis in Asia. And this insect developed on those trees, and those trees probably have some resistance to it. Over here, we have sugarberry and hackberry, native to the southeast. And you can see here, these like our hackberry and sugarberry trees. So they've never seen these. So once these got over here, these insects can fly. You can see they have wings. Some of them have wings, some don't. But you can see the top left, you can see the white waxy material that covers the adult that has wings. And then I put a little alcohol in the one on the top right to show a little bit better how that aphid looks. But usually in August, September, they start flying around. And it looks like snowflakes. They're just kind of fluttering in the air. And that's how they disperse from tree to tree. And then they're going to, lay some eggs that overwinter on the plant. So how do we control aphids? Well, in the past, we've used products like malathion and orthene. Then the neonicotinoids came along. Merit especially is very effective, long-lasting for aphid control. So those are used systemically. We can, Tristar is used as a spray, but the other product can be applied to the soil, taken up by the roots. And that's very long-lasting control. If you have folks that don't want to use neonicotinoids, we can spray, but it's more difficult on a large tree to spray. But Endeavor, Aria, Altus, Mainspring, Tanagar, those are products that can be sprayed to the foliage when aphids are there. Also, horticultural oils and soaps can be used, insecticidal soaps. But again, more difficult on a larger tree to spray. That's why the neonicotinoids have been very effective. And for Asian woolly hackberry aphid, that's what people like to use. As we get warmer in the year, in the spring, and especially in the summer, two-spotted spider mites. They don't overwinter like the spruce mite and the southern red mite by laying eggs on the plant. They actually overwinter in weeds and such, on the underside of weeds that are close to the soil, in the turf grass, for instance. And you can see here, as it warms up, then they're going to move up into trees, shrubs, and other plants, annuals, flowering annuals, whatever. So as the warmer temperatures, they can go from egg stage to nymphs to adults to eggs again in about 8 days when you get these real warm summer temperatures. Fortunately, we have lots of miticides available now. Avid's been around a long time. But we have newer products also. Akari, Sirocco has 2 different miticides in it. Magus is a fairly new product. Hexagon is primarily ovicidal, so you want to use that to mainly control the eggs. If you want to have also active life stages, you're going to need to use another product. Floramite's been around a little while now, very effective. Forbid works on rust mites, spider mites, lots of different kind of mites. So that's a great product. Sultan's a brand new, real safe to use miticide. So we have lots of products. These are all labeled for use in the landscape. Even your neem oils can be used. You can directly contact them. Sirocco, you can see here, has 2 active ingredients, abamectin as in avid, and biphenazate. I believe that's floramite. And it can be used in a lot of different situations, landscape, nursery, greenhouse, interior scape. And it also has, since it has avid in it, or abamectin, it has activity against other non-mite pests like aphids, whiteflies, thrips, and even leaf miners. But you can see it can be used in other kind of mites also. Leaf miners are insects that live between the top and lower layer of the leaf. Sometimes you can see their frass, their black excrement within the serpentine type leaf mine. Some leaf miners make more of a blotch leaf mine. It's not so meandering. You'll see those like, yellow poplar weevil onto a poplar will make a blotch type leaf mine. Let's look at the scale insects. The wax scale have very thick waxy coverings. We have a couple different types here in Tennessee, Indian wax scale and Florida wax scale. Let's look at the Indian wax scale first. It looks like it has a little top knot on it, on the top of the wax there. You can see a little projection. That's how I can tell them apart. These layers, these plates of wax are very thick. Look like chewing gum, don't they? Or wax that you would get at Halloween time in those little bottles, wax bottles. But as you can see, if you lifted this wax scale up, the interior of it, the actual insect's a reddish color. But they're going to lay their eggs on, usually on the leaves, on the foliage, like on holly or something like that. And then they're going to move, the immatures will move to the twigs to overwinter. And that's where they'll develop the rest of their time. A lot of those are going to be on the twigs. Here's the Florida wax scale. You can see a little more rounder, but really definitely thick waxy covering. And you can see the nymphs, the immature stages. And the immature stages are starting to put out waxy filaments, but they're not completely covered. So a contact insecticide to the crawlers, the first instars or second instar nymphs, would probably control them. You can see these are on the foliage. This particular adult was on the leaf, so it must have been an evergreen type holly plant that it could overwinter on. So you can see a lot of little ones around it. Systemic insecticides work very well because they're sucking the plant cells contents, and they're getting it that way from inside the plant. Another type of scale insect that we have is called a felt scale. We have azalea bark scale is one we've had for quite a while. That's a felt scale, but it's not really a big problem on azalea. But this crepe myrtle bark scale is a big issue because we've had crepe myrtle in the United States for many years. We have all kinds of different cultivars, different colors, different size plants. And guess what? Most all of them are very susceptible to crepe myrtle bark scale, which came from China, which makes sense because that's where crepe myrtle plants came from originally. So all these years we've had the crepe myrtle over here without this pest. Now we have the pest and we're having to deal with it. You can see that this pest produces lots of honeydew. Honeydew's clear, but on that clear honeydew, you get the black sooty mold growing. So you can see the bark has turned black. So it's pretty easy to see, black bark, white polka dots, okay? They overwinter on twigs. This is a twig under a microscope, so it's only about a pencil diameter twig or less. You can see these little tiny cracks and fissures in the developing bark as it grows, and that's where they like to get down in there. And they're tapping into that plant. You see they really don't have much wax on them. It looks like Sonic Hedgehog, just a little waxy filaments coming out of it. But if you hit those with some oil sprays, you can get some control during the dormant period. What we're seeing is this pest, we first found it in Tennessee. It was first brought into the United States around Dallas, Texas. Then it moved into Germantown area of Shelby County, where Memphis is. And it's spread throughout Shelby County. It's in Fayette County. It's in Madison County in West Tennessee, other counties in West Tennessee. But in the last couple of years, we've really seen it move into Middle Tennessee and even East Tennessee. So we found it last year in Murfreesboro, Rutherford County, Williamson County, and even Knox County. And this is a picture from Rutherford County. So you can see it's been there a while, but we didn't, for some reason, nobody told us about it. But you think that gets somebody's attention. They ended up cutting the plant down because it looked so bad. The good thing about it, if you do cut it down and you drench it with a neonicotinoid, it will come back up. If the plant's still alive, has a good root system, it will have clean, no insects on it, and then the neonics will protect it. So that's one thing you can do if you get this pest. If you just want to, if it looks bad like this, you just want to start over, these crepe myrtle will do that. Soft scale. What do we have? These produce lots of honeydew. We get a lot of that black sooty mold growth. One I'm going to show you today is the pine tortoise scale. It really will turn a pine tree black, produces lots of honeydew. You can see it's a roundish type scale, and underneath that female, takes a full year for her to develop, I believe. She'll produce her eggs. And look how much sooty mold you can get. So if you had a Christmas tree farm, fortunately, you only see one or two of these in a planting. How do they move around? The little crawlers that come out in the spring, they hatch out, they emerge, they can hitchhike on birds, on squirrels, on deer, whatever rubs up against them or lands on them. And they can hitchhike and go to another plant. It could be 20, 30 yards away or further. So you'll see a plant totally black here, and then way over here, you'll see another one. The rest of them might not be affected at all. But you'll need to treat those crawlers when they emerge in early June or July to prevent this. Soft scale, felt scale, we can use a lot of different insecticides. We can apply the systemic products to the soil. The neonicotinoids, very effective. Using Safari, you want to use that a little closer to when you think the crawlers are emerging. Publication 1589 has dates in there that generally tell you when to be looking for certain pests and when to treat them. We can also wait till the crawlers have emerged and spray them with insecticides. You could use oil sprays for that matter. You get good coverage. We also like for scale, I like distance, fulcrum, talus. These are insect growth regulators. You can add maybe 0.5% horticultural oil when you apply them. Very effective and a little safer on the beneficials. Very effective on crawlers, if you especially get that first instar crawler stage. Let's look at some scarab beetles that are turf pests. Look at this picture here from left to right. We've got the Mayer June beetle. That's a pretty good size one. Not all of them are that big. Then the green June beetle, generally the biggest scarab beetle we have that's a turf pest. You can see we don't have the European Schaefer in Tennessee, but we do have the southern mass Schaefer and the northern mass Schaefer. We have, of course, the Japanese beetle. We even have some oriental beetles, haven't become a big problem yet. Not sure about Asiatic garden beetle, but we do have some black turfgrass Atenius, mainly a pest of golf courses, and that's the little tiny one on the right-hand side. If you look below it, you'll see the relative size of the larvae. So the black turfgrass Atenius on the far right is very tiny. That's as large as it gets. Where the second from the left, the green June beetle is very large, white grub. It's not quite as C-shaped, and it will actually come out of the ground at night and wiggle, especially when there's a heavy dew, and wiggle on its back. And that's why sometimes when we spray an insecticide for green June beetle, you'll find the next day lots of them dead on the surface. Only the green June beetle will come out. The other ones die in the ground, so you have to water insecticides into the soil, into the turf grass. Let's look at the May beetles. You can see them, they come out. These are the beetles, you'll see them, brown beetles generally get on the screens of your windows in the spring and summer. If you look at the underside of the tip of the abdomen, you'll see this raster pattern. It's usually two either parallel or slightly curved rows of short seta, and that's the raster pattern that we talk about. Right there at the underside of the tip of the abdomen. So these scarab beetles look a lot alike. So by looking at the raster, we can tell the species apart. Now, pupa are really hard to tell apart, but once they come out in the spring, they've been in the soil, deep in the soil profile in the winter. They come up in the spring to feed on roots. And then when they're ready to pupate, they pupate and they're not going to feed anymore. So it's really too late to spray. The pupa aren't feeding. They're not going to get very good control. So the adults are going to emerge from the pupa from the ground. So let's look at a green June beetle. There's the adult. There's the larva, and you can see on the larger one on the left hand side, the tip of the abdomen, you'll see it looks like a number one raster pattern, looks like an exclamation point or number one on the green June beetle. Scolia dubia is a parasitoid wasp. So it's a pollinator, but it also lays its eggs in the ground on green June beetle white grubs. And then that larva of the Scolia dubia will devour that white grub and kill it. So a parasitoid means that it kills its host. And so these things, you'll see these wasps flying over the surface of the ground at a low level, and they're beneficial. So don't spray them. They're good wasps. They generally would not sting anyone. It's possible, I suppose, but I've never heard of it. What can we do as far as preventative control? A lot of high quality turf, like golf courses, places like that, where you don't want any damage at all to your turf grass, will use preventative insecticides. Products often like imidacloprid, merit, celiprin, meridian, arena. These are products that can be put down usually from mid-June to mid-July, either before eggs are laid or as eggs are just hatching. And those are good timing for that. So you really don't have to really know how many grubs are out there. You just know you have a history of having white grub problems, and you want to treat early before any damage occurs. We can also do summer sampling of grubs. And this is when you actually have to wait for the grubs to hatch out from the eggs and then make a determination, are there enough white grubs to damage the turf? If so, we're going to treat. So we'll make square foot cuts in the turf, lift it back. You can use a cup hole changer like in a cup cutter as in a golf course. 10 of those equals a square foot. You lift out the soil, you can put it in a metal pan, kind of break it open, and you're going to see very tiny white grubs. You can be doing this in, let's say, early to mid-July, maybe even as late as early August. And you'll be looking, you might see some eggs that just hatched, so they're very tiny little white grubs, and you might see some bigger ones that might be a quarter to a half inch or so, and those could be 1-year-old May beetles. So it's going to be a combination. So you might have new grubs from Japanese beetles, and you might have some year-old ones from May beetles in the same area. The annual white grubs means it takes 1 year to go through their life cycle, or the Japanese beetle, for instance, Oriental beetle. It's going to take about 5 to 10 of these grubs per square foot before you reach that aesthetic threshold where you need to treat. So it's going to take more than 1 or 2, isn't it? Now, mass Schaefers don't just feed on live roots, they feed on dead organic matter. So they're going to do less actual damage per individual white grub. So it's going to take 15 or 20 grubs per square foot. And that's if you look at a typical unirrigated backyard in Tennessee, we usually have more mass Schaefers than anything else. And in my yard, I generally don't have anywhere near 15 to 20 grubs per square foot. So I've never even treated for white grubs. Black turfgrass Attenuus, more of a golf course situation problem. It's going to take 30 to 50 grubs per square foot before you treat. And so, that's a lot too, but remember, they're a lot smaller. May or June beetles, probably the most damaging. Again, they have probably a 2-year life cycle in Tennessee. It's going to be 3 to 8 of those per square foot. So that's the one that's the closest to, my yard, maybe 1 or 2 any kind of white grub per square foot. And so I never treat. Now, green June beetle, 6 to 8 grubs per square foot. When should we sample for white grubs? Again, you could start early July or mid-July through early August, but check those, do that periodically. And you want to check more than one area. Like a golf course, you could take dozens of soil samples, you might find that the lower areas where more moisture, you'll have more white grubs, where higher areas, you don't have very many. So you don't always have to treat the whole golf course. Once we reach our aesthetic threshold, we can make curative applications with Dilox or acetylprin. Dilox is trichlorphon. If we're treating for white growths with acetylprin, there's a rate between 8 and 16 fluid ounces per acre. If you're looking later in August or even early September, the mid-instar grubs are present, you might want to go with a higher rate. But if you get them early in first instar especially, you go with the lower rate. The acetylprin is an amazing product because in addition to white grubs, it also controls Lepidoptera, cutworms, armyworms, also beetles like billbugs, and again, another Lepidoptera, sod webworm. So it's given you control of several different types of turfgrass pests. So if you applied it early, for instance, you could get almost season-long control for armyworms and billbugs and such. The higher the rate you use, the longer, the more months it's going to last. So you could get several months easily out of this product. It's kind of systemic into the plant. When we talk about using neonicotinoids in the landscape, we can use them for trees and shrubs, but we can also use them for turf pests. And we want to be able to use those safely. And one concern we have are pollinators. Neonicotinoids might not kill the pollinator, but they might be a sublethal thing. It might affect its behavior and other things. So we probably want to keep pollinators from moving into turfgrass areas that we're going to treat. So one thing we can do that works very effectively is to mow the turf immediately before spraying any insecticide. Let's say you're treating for using the imidacloprid or merit to treat white grubs. You can remove almost all the flowers from the broadleaf weeds. That will prevent bees and wasps and other pollinators from foraging. And then the insecticide can be watered into the soil, and then it's in the root zone where it needs to be for those white grubs. Also, just frequent mowing. So that's what you want to do. And I like to do it right before. As far as herbicide use, if you don't have broadleaf weeds, that's really great because you can spray and then you don't have to worry about these pollinators being in there. What about a situation like the picture here where we have a turf grass surrounded by flowering plants? It could be annuals, perennials. We even have a water feature there. One thing we can do is leave a little buffer, a couple-foot buffer between the turfgrass area treated with the insecticide so that if the roots of the flowering plants from the plant beds move into the turfgrass, they're not going to be picking up the neonicotinoid insecticide. Now let's look at one other thing. We also have trees and shrubs here. If we're going to spray with an insecticide, what do we want to do? We want to do it probably early morning when the wind is still, that you don't want any breeze at all. We don't want insecticide drift. But look underneath those trees. You'll see flowering plants possibly. We want to cover those plants where the insecticide would drift down onto with an opaque tarp. So when you're spraying, you want to have all flowering plants tarp so no bees are there, so none of that insecticide gets in the flowers. Once the spray is dried, 10 minutes later, whatever, you can probably lift up the tarp and get it out of there. You probably would like to tarp that water feature also. So you don't want any insecticide drifting into a pond that might have aquatic insects in it, might have fish or frogs or other things. So you want to do that also. So just by doing some of these simple things, I think we can really cut down on our problems with any insecticide or pesticide drift in general. If you're applying herbicides, you want to be careful too. You don't want it drifting from weeds you want to kill onto your plants. So anyway, that's about what I have to talk about today. Here's a nice picture of a cottony cushion scale. Those white things, those fluted white things, are ovisacs. So the female scale lays her eggs in an ovisac, sort of like cottony camellia scale that we see on hollies and yews. But this is on an andina. If you need to contact me, email me or call my office at any time. I cover the whole state of Tennessee, insect pests of trees, shrubs, greenhouse, turf grass, tobacco, vegetables, fruit, and even now hemp. So if you have any entomology questions, please contact me. And again, thank you so much. It's been great sharing this with you today.